Picture this. It's 11:47 p.m. You're lying in bed, phone face down on the nightstand because you made a deal with yourself, a real one this time, that you would stop doom scrolling after 11. You last approximately 4 minutes before you're watching a video about competitive dog grooming in South Korea. You're not proud of it, you can't explain it, but something in you simply cannot handle the silence of the dark. Now hold that feeling, that restlessness, that strange, slightly panicked relationship you have with nighttime and what to do with it. Hold it, because here's the thing nobody tells you. That feeling is brand new. Evolutionarily speaking, it's an infant. The idea that night is something to be gotten through, something to be survived with content and noise and the blue glow of a screen is so recent it barely registers on the human timeline. Go back far enough, and night wasn't the enemy of rest. It was something else entirely, something people moved through differently. Something that had its own rituals, its own logic, its own social world that operated completely outside the one we think of as real life. So what did humans actually do when the sun went down for the vast majority of the time we've existed on this planet? The answer is going to make you feel like you've been living wrong. Let's start with what you probably assume. You probably assume that ancient humans, whether we're talking hunter-gatherers on the African savanna 70,000 years ago or medieval farmers in 14th century France, went to sleep when it got dark and woke up when it got light. Simple, logical, energy efficient. The kind of behavior you'd expect from people who didn't have Netflix or a reason to stay up. That assumption is wrong. And it's not a little wrong. It's wrong in a way that reshapes how you understand human nature, human sleep, human community, and honestly, your own body. Here's what we actually know. Anthropologist Jerome Groopman, studying contemporary hunter-gatherer groups in Tanzania and Namibia, the Hadza and the Kung San, two of the most studied traditional societies on Earth, found something that stopped him cold. These communities, living without electricity, without alarm clocks, without any of the artificial light we use to bulldoze our circadian rhythms, did not simply go to sleep at dark and wake up at dawn. They stayed up for hours, not because they had to, not because of predators prowling at the fence line, but because the night, it turns out, is when the real conversation happens. Around the fire, and fire is the crucial technology here, the one that changed everything, people talked. Not the kind of functional daytime talk about where to find water or who was going to carry what. Nighttime talk was different. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years recording conversations among the Juhan Kung Bushmen of the Kalahari, and what she found was so striking it felt almost like catching people in a secret. Daytime conversations, about 34% of the time, were what you'd call practical, resource talk, complaint talk, the verbal equivalent of a spreadsheet. But nighttime conversations? Nighttime was 81% stories, narrative, myth, tales of hunts that happened years ago, told with voices and gestures and the kind of dramatic pause that would make a podcast producer weep with envy. Night was when the community became a community, not through labor, through language. Think about that for a second. The oldest social technology humans have, storytelling, ran primarily on a nocturnal schedule. And here's where it gets genuinely disorienting, because Wiesner's research suggests that the cognitive leap from daytime primate group dynamics to the kind of complex, symbolic, morality-laden storytelling that makes us human didn't happen in the bright light of noon. It happened around a fire, in the dark, at the hour you're currently trying to white-knuckle your way through with a phone you promised yourself you wouldn't touch. The night didn't slow ancient humans down, it lit them up, differently. So what does that mean for what came next, for the thousands of years of human history that followed, before electricity rewired everything? What happened to the night as humans moved from savanna to settlement, from campfire to hearth, from tribe to town? That's where things get even stranger. Here's the thing about sleep that nobody taught you in school, probably because it would have raised too many uncomfortable questions about the entire structure of modern life. For most of recorded human history, people didn't sleep the way you sleep. They didn't lie down, go unconscious for 8 hours, and emerge blinking into morning. That pattern, one long consolidated block of sleep, uninterrupted, beginning sometime around 11 and ending with an alarm, is so historically abnormal it's almost funny. It's like assuming everyone has always eaten 3 meals a day at fixed times, which, by the way, they also haven't, but that's a different video. The sleep pattern that dominated human life for centuries, possibly millennia, was something called biphasic sleep. And the historian who uncovered its paper trail is one of the great detective stories in academic history. His name is Roger Eckertsch. He's a professor at Virginia Tech, and he spent over 2 decades, not years, decades, crawling through archives, court records, diaries, medical texts, prayer books, literature. He was looking for something specific, references to how ordinary people in pre-industrial Europe and the early Americas actually structured their nights. And what he found, buried in thousands of documents across 5 centuries, was a pattern so consistent it couldn't be coincidence. People slept in 2 distinct shifts. The first sleep, they called it. That was the name for it. First sleep, or in French, premier sommeil, appearing in documents from the medieval period all the way into the early 19th century. People would go to bed shortly after dark, sleep for roughly 3 to 4 hours, and then wake up. Not accidentally, not because of a noise outside. They woke up because their bodies expected to wake up. This was normal. This was the rhythm. And then came the gap. The period between first and second sleep lasted anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, sometimes longer. And this is the part that should genuinely stop you cold, because what people did during that gap was not lie there staring at the ceiling in a low-grade panic wondering if they had a sleeping disorder. They did things, purposeful, social, spiritual, creative things. They talked to their spouses. Not the half-conscious mumble you exchange before one of you rolls over and checks Instagram. Real conversation. Eckertsch found references in medical literature from the 16th and 17th centuries recommending the intersleep period, that's actually what physicians called it, as the ideal time for married couples to conceive children, because the body was relaxed, the mind was clear, and there was, crucially, nothing else competing for attention. No notifications, no backlog of emails radiating guilt from a device on the nightstand. People prayed. The canonical hour of matins, the middle-of-the-night prayer service in Catholic monastic tradition, wasn't some bizarre act of sleep deprivation. It was scheduled precisely because monks knew their congregants would naturally be awake around that hour anyway. The church didn't drag people out of sleep, it met them where they already were. And people visited neighbors, in the dark, in winter. This sounds insane through a modern lens, but remember, when your entire community operates on the same biological clock, midnight isn't the dead hour, it's just another hour, one with fewer social obligations than the daytime, which honestly sounds like a selling point. And people thought. Eckertsch found repeated references in diaries and letters to the intersleep period as a time of unusual mental clarity. A French physician named Laurent Joubert wrote in 1582, and this is a man who had no concept of neuroscience, no knowledge of REM cycles or slow-wave sleep, that the waking period between first and second sleep was the time when the brain was most capable of processing the day's events and producing insight. He didn't know why, he just knew it was true. We now know why. The neurological state you enter immediately after waking from deep sleep is called hypnopompia, a transitional state between sleep and full wakefulness, where the prefrontal cortex is still partially offline, but the pattern matching and associative regions of the brain are unusually active. Astronauts have chased this state deliberately. Salvador Dalí famously napped in a chair holding a key above a metal plate, so that the moment he fell asleep, the key would drop, wake him, and he could capture whatever imagery surfaced in that liminal space. Thomas Edison did the same thing with steel balls. Ancient humans weren't doing this on purpose. They didn't know they were doing it at all. They just knew that the middle of the night felt different, softer, more honest. So why did any of this change? Why did the two-sleep system, stable across centuries and cultures, simply disappear? The answer involves one invention, one city, and a shift so fast it happened inside a single human lifetime. The city was Paris. The year was 1667, and the man responsible for collapsing a millennium of human sleep behavior was a police lieutenant named Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, who almost certainly never lost a single night of rest worrying about the consequences of what he was about to do. De la Reynie had a problem. Paris was dangerous after dark. Not dangerous in the abstract philosophical sense that cities always carry a certain ambient menace, but dangerous in the very concrete sense that if you walked down the wrong street after sunset, you stood a reasonable chance of being robbed, stabbed, or simply swallowed by the kind of total darkness that modern humans have genuinely never experienced. Not once. Not even camping. The darkness before artificial light was a different category of dark. It had texture. It had weight. It was the kind of dark where you could hold your hand 6 inches from your face and see nothing. De la Reynie's solution was to mandate street lighting. He ordered oil lanterns hung at regular intervals throughout Paris, roughly 2,700 of them initially, a number that would grow to over 6,500 by the end of the century. Within a generation, Amsterdam followed, then London, then every city in Europe that wanted to signal it was modern, civilized, and open for business after sundown. And here's the part that should make you pause and read it again slowly. This was not a decision made for the benefit of ordinary people's sleep, health, or well-being. It was a security measure, an urban management tool. The fact that it would go on to permanently restructure the neurological rhythm of every human being born in an industrialized country for the next 4 centuries was not a consideration anyone gave a single thought to. Nobody held a committee meeting about circadian biology. Nobody consulted a physician about the intersleep period. A police administrator in 17th century Paris wanted fewer muggings, and the ripple effect reached your bedroom last night. That's the scale of what we're talking about. Because once the streets were lit, the social logic of nighttime changed completely. Shops stayed open later. Theaters pushed their curtains back. Coffee houses, which had been quietly revolutionizing European intellectual life throughout the 1600s, the Royal Society in London traces its origins partly to coffeehouse conversations, now had reason to stay lit and loud well past the hours that would have previously sent everyone home to their first sleep. Night became an extension of day, and that reframing, once it took hold economically, was impossible to reverse. By the time the Industrial Revolution arrived in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the infrastructure of extended wakefulness was already in place. Factories just finished the job. When you need workers at a loom at 5 in the morning and again at 6 in the evening, you cannot afford a workforce that structures its night around a 2-hour contemplative gap. The factory clock didn't care about your intersleep period. The factory clock didn't care about anything except output. And so, within roughly a century, which is nothing biologically speaking, a rounding error on the human timeline, the sleep pattern that had governed our species for tens of thousands of years was quietly retired. Not debated, not mourned, just discontinued. like a product that stopped being profitable. The psychiatrist Thomas Ware ran an experiment in the 1990s that proved just how deep this pattern is still buried in us. He took a group of volunteers and removed all artificial light from their lives for a month. No lamps, no screens, darkness from dusk to dawn. Within a few weeks, without any instruction, without any suggestion, every single participant spontaneously shifted into biphasic sleep. First sleep, a period of quiet waking. Second sleep. The pattern re-emerged on its own, like a language you'd been told you'd forgotten that turns out to be still fluent somewhere underneath. Ware's participants described the intersleep waking period in terms that sounded almost spiritual, a state of unusual calm, a sense of being, as one subject put it, pleasantly adrift. Their prolactin levels, a hormone associated with the calm that follows orgasm and also with certain meditative states, were measurably elevated during this period in ways not seen during normal waking hours. Their bodies were doing something old, something that our entire modern architecture of light and alarm clocks and sleep hygiene podcasts has been systematically preventing. Think about what that means. The thing you've been calling insomnia, that maddening experience of waking in the small hours, mind suddenly and inconveniently alert, unable to return to sleep, may not be a disorder at all. It may be your ancient sleep architecture trying to assert itself through 4 centuries of industrial override. You're not broken. You're just running very old software on a system that was redesigned without asking you. So what do we do with that? What does any of this actually mean for the way you live your life right now, tonight, in a world that is absolutely not about to turn off its streetlights? That's the question worth sitting with.
Here is the thread that runs through everything we've covered, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Ancient humans gathered around fires and told stories in the dark because the night created a psychological container that the day couldn't. The lowered light, the physical stillness, the absence of tasks, all of it produced a mental state that was softer, more associative, more emotionally honest than the transactional busyness of daylight hours. Then, for centuries, across continents, people built that same quality into their sleep architecture. A natural pause in the middle of the night, a quiet hour of reflection and conversation and prayer that wasn't accidental but biological, baked in. And then, in the space of roughly 150 years, a police administrator, an industrial revolution, and an Edison light bulb conspired to take all of that away and replace it with the instruction to simply be unconscious as efficiently as possible and report to duty in the morning. The night went from being a space to being an obstacle. And we've been paying for it ever since in ways so normalized we've stopped recognizing them as costs. The modern sleep crisis is not a mystery. Roughly 1 in 3 adults in developed countries reports regularly not getting enough sleep. Rates of anxiety spike in the evening hours. The phenomenon therapists call revenge bedtime procrastination, where people stay up far too late doing nothing in particular simply because it's the only portion of the day that feels like it belongs to them, is now common enough to have a name, a Reddit community, and approximately 10,000 think pieces. People are clawing back the night because something in them knows it was supposed to be theirs. They've just forgotten what to do with it. And here is the reframe that changes everything. The problem is not that you can't sleep. The problem is that you've inherited a relationship with nighttime that was designed by factory owners and street lighting administrators, not by your biology. You were handed a model of the night that says darkness is for unconsciousness, and any wakefulness after a certain hour is a failure, a symptom, a thing to be medicated or white noised or melatonin gummied into submission. And you accepted it because everyone around you accepted it, because everyone around them accepted it, all the way back to a decision made in Paris in 1667 that nobody asked you about. Your ancestor sitting by a fire 40,000 years ago, listening to a story about a hunt that happened before anyone in the circle was born, was not optimizing their sleep. They were doing something that registered in their nervous system as necessary, as real, as the thing that made the daylight worth showing up for. Your other ancestor, waking in the quiet dark of a medieval European winter, lying still beside their spouse and talking in low voices about nothing in particular, was not suffering from a sleep disorder. They were inside the part of the night that belonged to reflection, to the thoughts that are too tender for daylight, to the self that doesn't perform for anyone. You still have access to both of those things. The technology hasn't actually taken them away. It's just buried them under the assumption that night is something to be gotten through rather than something to be inhabited. So here is what you can actually do. Tonight, or this week, pick one night and do something that would have made complete sense to every human who lived before 1800 and sounds slightly radical now. When you wake in the small hours, and if you're an adult with a normally functioning nervous system, there's a reasonable chance you will. Don't reach for your phone. Don't catastrophize the wakefulness. Don't run the mental calculus of how many hours you have left before your alarm. Just lie there, or sit up. Light something if you want. A candle if you're feeling committed to the bit. Let your mind do what Eckertch's archives and Ware's study and 40,000 years of firelit storytelling suggest it was always designed to do in that hour. Associate freely, process quietly, exist without agenda. You don't have to be productive. You don't have to journal or meditate or optimize. You just have to stop treating the middle of the night like a problem. Because the people who came before you, the ones who hunted and farmed and prayed and told stories in the dark, they didn't have better sleep than you because they had less stress or cleaner air or more physical labor, though all of those things were certainly true. They had better sleep because they had a different relationship with the night itself. They understood, without ever articulating it as a philosophy, that darkness was not the absence of day. It was its own thing, with its own texture and its own gifts and its own version of what it means to be human. You already know this. Some part of you has always known this. That's why the dark still feels like it's waiting for something from you. It is. It always has been.